Hey, welcome to my Connections presentation. So for mine, I chose to do the story Fleur, which is by Louise Erdrich. And it was actually first published in Esquire magazine in August of 1986, which I thought was cool. Didn't expect to see a story that came from Esquire, of all places, in our literature textbook. So quick background on what Fleur is about. Fleur follows its title character, Fleur Pillager, who's a young Chippewa woman, the Chippewa being a Native American tribe, mainly in the Midwest, Michigan area, up into Canada, Great Lakes region. So, Fleur is this, the background we receive on her is that she's this mysterious, supernatural woman. They believe her to be some kind of supernatural being, a witch, like a Wendigo, who's a shape-shifting witch or demon who can take on the form of a human or an animal. What points us towards this is villagers follow her out when she goes hunting in the winter, and they'll see her trails in the snow suddenly turn from human footprints to animals. So they think she might be this Wendigo chosen to take on the human form, or just a human who follows the supernatural, does witchcraft. A lot of this comes from she drowned and survived on 2 accounts. First time when she was a child, the men who rescued her wound up going missing the next day and then turned up dead. The second time, no one rescued her because of this previous experience. They were all afraid to touch her. She washed up on shore, seemingly dead. A few days later, woke up, cursed a man she saw on the shore, told him that he would take her place in a watery grave. He wound up drowning in his own bathtub. So, these 2 instances and the shape-shifting and the other little background we receive, they say she partakes in these evil things. She does dark things in her home. Everyone fears her. They want to exile her from the village, but everyone's too afraid because they don't want to die from her cursing them. Luckily, they don't have to exile her. She chooses to move out of the village on her own in the summer of 1920. She just all of a sudden up and leaves the reservation and winds up moving to this small town called Argus. Now, in Argus, she takes up a job in a butcher shop. Here, we find out our story is narrated by the only other woman in the butcher shop, Pauline, who runs the cash registers and sweeps, while Fleur, she describes as this very beautiful young woman, but very strong, and chooses to dress masculinely and does a lot of the manual labor with the men in the butcher shop and works right alongside them, no problem. Fleur takes on this role in the butcher shop, works, seemingly gets along with everyone until one night they're all playing cards, the men are all getting drunk, and it's late, and as they're choosing to leave, the 3 of the drunk men decide to brutally rape Fleur. Now, the next day, all of a sudden, a tornado rips through the town, and when they return to the butcher shop, they find the 3 men frozen dead in the meat locker. Fleur owns up to murder, saying she locked them in after they raped her. Obviously, it seems like there's more than just this cold murder going on where she locked them in the meat locker. Obviously, between the tornado, it's alluding to this supernatural spiritual connection Fleur has, and she might have done more than just lock them in the container. So Fleur eventually decides to move back out to this lake where she drowned on a little island in a house. Now, Fleur's connection with this lake, besides drowning, a lot of people assume because of these drownings she's associated with the Chippewa water demon, the Mississippi, and he is seen as the fish demon, lake man they call him, and he is part fish, part man, kind of has webbed hands and has, similar to a mermaid tail, his legs are connected in one tail, sprout out, and he has these brass colored brown scales and bright green eyes. What his whole thing is, he comes to the shore and takes on the form of a man, those scales turning into a dark tan skin, but he keeps those bright green eyes, turns his webbed hands into normal hands, his tail becomes legs, and he lures young women out to the lake, gets them, transforms, takes them out to the lake with him, and kills them. And they assume Fleur's associated with him, but not one of his victims like these other women, because she's drowned and come back. They think she's luring these men out and helping him kill and find new victims, that she's another demon, that she's working with him, that she's associated to him in some way, whether he's fallen in love with her or she fell in love with him, and there is some kind of connection between the 2. What further exemplifies is once she moves out to this house in the lake, Pauline's the only one who visits her. On one of her visits, Fleur's pregnant. She continues to go back, and she's there to help Fleur deliver her baby. When the baby comes out, the baby has this dark tan skin and bright green eyes. This is where our story ends. It leads us to think that maybe the baby is the child of the water demon, or just happens to be one of the men who raped Fleur, but he happened to look similar to the Water Demon. They don't specify. It's kind of for the reader to infer. So I decided to do a little rating, have a little fun with it. I gave it an 8 out of 10. I thought it was one of the better stories in our textbook. I was really interested in it. I enjoyed it, and I wanted to take it on because it wasn't one we got to read in class. So I wanted to expose everyone to that. Yeah, so the site I chose to connect it to was Okumsky, which is a Native American village that was just outside of Port Jervis. I'll put the picture here of the sign, me with the sign, and the land to the west that the sign describes where the village stood. So the village was a Mohawk village, which were obviously part of the larger Iroquois, that were the primary Native American groups that lived in our area. So obviously the broad connection between the two is that it's all Native American. Fleur was a Chippewa woman. This village belonged to the Mohawk Indians, who were also Native American. That's a broad connection. The closer connection is the mythology associated with the two. So even though the groups lived in different geographical regions, they did overlap. The Iroquois did expand up into the Great Lakes region and kind of on the borders with the Chippewa and larger groups like the Algonquins, and kind of fight. There was fighting between the two groups, and that led to a lot of cultural diffusion, though, because they lived in such close quarters, a lot of cross-culturalization. So there's a lot of mythology shared between the two. So how Okumsky falls into our class. The village was abandoned in 1730, so obviously before our time period, but it was excavated in 1909. That's how it was found out that the village existed. They had found the remains in 1909 during an archaeological dig. Everything from the village, all the artifacts, now belong to the New York State Museum up in our capital, Albany. So sadly, I went on their website and I couldn't find exactly what artifacts were pulled from it. They didn't have Okumsky listed specifically. It was all just grouped in Mohawk. So they didn't go through and meticulously list everything that came from Okumsky like they probably would do today. If it was excavated in 2020, it would be more well taken care of, more well preserved. It wouldn't just be thrown in as here's some more Mohawk artifacts. Mohawk here. You know, there'd probably be a separate display just for each village like Okumsky. So sadly, I can't tell you exactly what came from the village, besides that there were typical artifacts like arrows, tools, other things like that. So where does this mythology connect besides just being Native American? So the Iroquois had a similar belief in a Great Lake spirit they called the Onawa, I believe, and it was a little bit different from the Chippewa one. The Chippewa also believed in another water spirit that they called the Water Panther, whereas the Iroquois believed in a water dragon. Although very similar premise, this dragon was feared by the people because he was known to capsize boats, drown fishermen, drown swimmers, kill humans. They were his primary victims. So they have this very similar cultural connection, which is especially interesting when you look at the vast range of Native American tribes that existed in the U.S. and how geographically and physically different they were based on their geography. Obviously, the Iroquois were known to live in this northeastern region. They built long houses. They lived in dense woodlands, whereas Midwestern tribes were on the plains and prairies. They lived in teepees, were known for their horseback riding. But even so, these mythology and cultural similarities exist. Iroquois also believing in these kind of witches that Fleur was believed to be, like a Wendigo. Another famous example is the Navajo, who believed in skinwalkers, they called them, which were shape-shifting witches, which some of you may have heard of before. But that was what my presentation is all about. It's the connection I found between Fleur and her Native American group, and the mythology behind them is so similar to the site Okumsky and the Mohawk Indians that lived in Orange County and are part of our local history. So that was my presentation. Hope you enjoyed.